Hello and welcome to the Spaces webinar today, very kindly presented by Junckers, who were one of our key sponsors at the study day this year at the University of Reading. It's going to be a really interesting webinar. We're going to be looking at sustainable flooring and being presented by two people with plenty of knowledge, technical manager Richard Aylen and Richard Redpath, who's the area specification sales manager. So we're delighted for them to join us. They're going to switch their cameras on now so that they can see you and switch on their microphone. We apologise for being a little late. That was a technical issue we were having at our end, so really apologise to anybody that has wondered why we are running a little late. We've spoken to Richard and we've agreed that we do Q&A at the end. We do have a chat box, so please put some messages into the chat box. It's always great, even if it's saying hello, whatever. It's just nice to know there's people out there because we can't see you. It's always a little bit odd when you're presenting on a webinar. And so use the chat box. And if you've got questions, then please put them in the chat box and we will take the questions at the end. And it will give both Richards a little bit of opportunity, to kind of maybe have a little reflection on how they're going to answer them. But more importantly, they're trying to keep to a time. And so by having them at the end, we can just round up. So please, any questions, there's no such thing as a silly question. So if something's in the back of your mind, then please put it in. This presentation is being recorded and will be on YouTube. So you'll be able to go back at a later date. And so I'm going to hand you over to Richard. I'm not sure which Richard's going to start. And we leave it with you guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. I'm Richard Redpath, and as Greg introduced, I'm on the specification team and been with Junckers since 2006, helping them specify Junckers flooring. So as Greg said, this presentation is for specifying sustainable flooring, and in particular we're going to be talking about hardwood floors. So in this presentation we'll look at how a solid wood floor is one of the most sustainable flooring options within the building industry, because it is an all-natural material. So we'll look how it can be sustainably sourced and how it can contribute to low carbon build, making your project more sustainable and environmentally friendly. We'll also identify the credentials for what you're specifying through internationally recognised accreditation schemes and assessment tools. And we'll also look at it how, as a building material, it promotes and maintains a healthy indoor climate. Also, the longevity, particularly of solid hardwood floors, how they can help your project for sustainability is that they can last for up to 60 years plus. So this gives low life cycle cost to the building. And in addition to that, we'll also be looking at how it is fully recyclable, biodegradable, and can be recycled at the end of its life. Excuse me. So Junckers is Europe's leading manufacturer of solid pre-finished hardwood floors. So we supply floors to these sports, residential, commercial projects. And as a company, we've got a history of caring for the environment. We make use of all the raw materials in a sustainable way, which we have actually done since the founding of Junckers in the 1930s. And we also offer a full technical backup and support service, so before, during, and after every project, as well as during the life cycle of the floor, and the technical backup support is handled by Richard here. And we also provide the wood care products. So I said they're pre-finished, but we also provide the wood care products for site applications in various finishes and sheen levels. And then we also provide cleaning and maintenance products to ensure that the client can keep the floor in good condition and to perform for decades. So we're going to look at just a brief history of Junckers. So Flemming Juncker recognised that the value of waste wood. So he set out ways to use that waste wood in industrial production, which is when he founded his sawmill in 1930. And he understood for a forest to remain healthy and productive, it had to be used and renewed, but also managed in a responsible way. And what he did is he actually encouraged the forest owners to replant trees to replace those that were felled. And it became his philosophy to use timber resources in the best possible way, which is now and has been since our founding the philosophy of Junckers in today. And an example of his influence would be that if we look at, say, beech, for example, where most of the beech is grown for Junckers products, the forests are now larger due to his influence. So let's have a look at how the floor's made. So the way in which we at Junckers manufacture our floors is vital to the company's commitment to sustainability and the environment. So we do manufacture, we don't use third parties, we're not a distributor, so we own the factory and make the product ourselves. All the waste material, so from all the raw material, we use everything. So any wasted material that cannot be formed into a floorboard to meet our strict grading or just isn't the quality to be formed into a floorboard is converted into pellets used to power our on-site power station. And we produce too much energy for our needs and we provide that back to the national grid in Denmark. So it's making Junckers a CO2 neutral company. Large sections of timber are used to form the floorboards. So that means less waste and lower energy consumptions. We use minimal use of adhesives within our products. So this allows the product at the end of its life to be fully recycled because it's not contaminated. We also have a unique press drying and kiln drying process which seasons the timber to a uniform moisture content. So one of the questions that we get asked frequently is how long do we need the floor to acclimatise on site? Essentially, you don't need to. It is seasoned in the factory, providing the site is up to the right conditions that are required for laying a wooden floor and other floors as well. The floor can be laid straight away. But in addition to that, this manufacturing process of kiln drying and press drying allows us to guarantee our floors over underfloor heating, and that is not something that can be taken for granted from other companies. So, excuse me. So specifying sustainable flooring and asking the right questions. So how can you, as a specifier, identify if the flooring option is sustainable? What sort of questions do you ask? And how deep do you actually dig? A lot of companies talk about sustainability, but there is more to the eye-catching marketing literature that's out there, and greenwashing that some companies do. And Richard will touch on that sort of thing later on. But the choice of floor will have long-term implications on the project's or the building's ability to achieve the net zero status, lower its operational cost, and provide a healthy indoor climate. And the lifespan of the chosen material is greatly going to have an impact on life cycle costs. So how do you know if a floor is sustainable, or what is sustainable? So the following really needs to be considered. What's the floor made for and how it's manufactured? For example, a solid piece of timber, it might sound obvious, is a solid piece of timber all the way through. An engineered board is several layers of different species glued together. Are all those different species that are glued together in the engineered format, are they all certified FSC or PFC? And Richard will come on to that certification later on in the presentation. Does it have chain of custody? So again, that's another thing. So you can have FSC, PFC, but there is the chain of custody from, you know, harvesting the wood right up to the manufacturing and delivery to site. Longevity is key. Can the floor last for a long time, and can it be reused, repurposed and recycled at the end of its life? And is it biodegradable and not contaminated by adhesives? And also, will it contribute to the lower operational costs of net zero projects, and how does this compare to other flooring options? So just a little bit of a summary. So, you know, using wood from sustainably managed forests means that floors are renewed. Using wood from sustainably managed forests means that forests are renewed so they continue to thrive and remain healthy, as well as captured carbon from the atmosphere, known as the carbon cycle. So for low carbon buildings, hardwood is a great material to use because it's naturally low in embodied carbon. So hardwood is seen as sort of nature's own carbon store. So while a tree grows, it will absorb enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, and 50% the weight of wood consists of carbon, so taken from the atmosphere, making that a key player in the fight to reduce the effects of climate change. So in short, growing more trees will reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, so reducing greenhouse gases. But more importantly, wood is the only building material that has the natural ability to take in the carbon from the atmosphere and store it. So it you know, as a carbon positive material, in contrast to concrete and steel, each cubic metre of wood grown holds 0.9 tonnes of CO2. So a single tree absorbs carbon dioxide at 54 kilograms per year. So to be sustainable, we must grow and harvest trees, and a felled tree will no longer remove carbon from the air, but it will continue to store it, and even when it's made into flooring. So building materials such as concrete and steel, they'll emit CO2 during the production. So instead of emitting CO2, wood absorbs it whilst growing, and it stores it once it's made into the flooring. So just to summarise before I hand over to Richard, Richard's part of the presentation. So wood is an all-natural material, and by specifying wood, your project will benefit from a floor that continues to store carbon, and after it's fulfilled its original purpose, hopefully stay in situ for many years, but it can be reused, repurposed or recycled. And also if it's manufactured from energy generated from waste material, during the flooring production process, there's less wastage and no reliance on fossil fuels. So I'm just going to hand over to Richard to do his part of the presentation.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hot seat. Thank you, Richard. Okay. Well, one of the key things you'll look at when you're specifying sustainable products is the manufacturing processes that are used, and you might ask questions such as, is the manufacturing plant powered by renewable energy, or do they rely on energy from fossil fuel sources, coal and gas, for example? How does the manufacturer deal with waste? Is the waste incorporated back into manufacturing, or does it need special processing that might be energy intensive? Are there any byproducts from the manufacturing? Do they use water, for example? Can that be just put straight back into water courses, or does that need treatment and reprocessing? And is that treatment energy intensive and has an impact on global warming? And how does the company source its raw materials, which, as Richard said, we're going to talk about that in particular in relation to hardwood shortly. But all these questions and more are included in an EPD, which is an environmental product declaration. We've done a few of these presentations now, and we're finding some people are completely conversant with EPDs, and for other people it's uncharted territory. So I'll explain basically what an EPD is for those that don't know, but I think they're becoming very commonly used for assessing building materials, low carbon buildings. It looks at the impact on global warming that product or material has. That's basically what it does. And it does that by looking at the whole life cycle of the product, from when it exists as raw materials right through to its manufacturing, transport, fixing on site, right through to when it's being disposed of or recycled, whatever its fate happens to be. So an EPD is a very useful document when you're designing sustainable buildings. Now, they are produced all to a common format, which is great because it means that it's very easy to extract that information and to compare. There's an ISO standard, which is ISO 14025, and they're all centrally registered as well. So with EPDs, you've got a very transparent, uniform system which makes them quite a usable document. Now, focusing on solid hardwood floors, which is really our main area of interest, when you're looking at raw materials, you're going to be concerned to know that the timber is sustainable and the production of the timber isn't going to have a damaging effect on the environment and on the local biodiversity, the local environment. So you want to be sure that the forests are properly managed, that the trees are replanted and the right kind of trees are replanted. You want to know that it's not having a negative effect on the local biodiversity, on air quality, on water quality, and that sort of thing. And properly managed forests, there are examples where they're actually increasing in size because of good management practices. Now, one thing I'll talk about a bit more later is having some kind of proof of all this. Any company will say they're sustainable, but you will really want to have some sort of proof that the timber is coming from managed sources. And the key to that is the chain of custody, which is basically an audit trail that takes you from where the timber stands in the forest right through to when it's turned into a finished product and fixed in the client's building. So that chain of custody gives you an unbroken chain where you can trace the movement of that wood all the way through. And chains of custodies are produced by a couple of the main timber accreditation schemes, which some of you may have heard of. FSC, you can see on the top left logo there. The Forest Stewardship Council, that logo appears in many places, including on paper and cardboard, actually, anything wood derived. And next to that is PEFC, which is the Programme for the Evaluation of Forest Certification. Now, those two schemes, they're different organisations, but they basically work in the same way and they exist for the same reason. And that means that companies like ours, like Junckers, and forest owners and manufacturers, distributors, you can get FSC or PEFC accreditation. And if you abide by their standards, you can prove that all the timber that you use is fully sustainable. So look out for those logos and for a chain of custody if you're specifying solid wood floors, because then you have that assurance. Just moving on from timber sourcing onto independently verified certification, which is important if any company is presenting you with their environmental credentials, you would expect them to have independent evidence that shows the company's environmental practices and credentials. And I'll talk about a few of those here. If you look at the logo on the top right, which looks like a house with a leaf embossed on it, that's the Danish indoor climate label, and that looks at indoor air quality. So the best way to explain that is to say what we've done, we submit our flooring samples to a laboratory, and they will measure the emissions of things like VOCs, volatile organic compounds, formaldehyde, and that sort of thing. They'll measure the emissions that come off those samples for a 30-day period. And if the emissions are below their threshold level, then you qualify to use their certificate and to say that your products are accredited. Now, that particular certificate is recognised by BREEAM. So if you're doing BREEAM assessments, the indoor climate label certificate will count towards BREEAM credits. The two circular logos there with DNVGL in them, ISO 14001 and ISO 50001, those are environmental management systems, and they don't actually set out specific standards, but they provide a template for companies to show what their environmental practices are. So they're fully documented and transparent. So again, it's another opportunity for companies to show their environmental credentials in an open, transparent way. The CE mark there, which should actually be accompanied by UKCA as well, which is the UK's version of this, that's a marking that comes on many products imported into this country, in and around Europe. And in itself, it doesn't look very interesting, but what lies behind it is more testing and more certification, which basically proves that the product is fit for purpose. So in the case of a solid wood floor, if you've got the CE or the UKCA mark on it, it will show you that that floor product perhaps it's got the right slip resistance, it's got the right level of fire resistance. If it's a sports floor, it will comply with the European sports standard. So it kind of gives you the assurance that it's fit for purpose. And the last logo there, the EPD Denmark, that happens to be the company that produced our EPDs. So there's other companies like that, but the point is that it's important to use an independent company that specialise in producing EPDs to get your documents produced, because then you've got the credibility that it's an independently generated document. Okay, so the other side of this is that the flooring industry is diverse, like many industries, and using many different kinds of materials. For some companies, the sustainable journey is relatively easy, and for others, it's more difficult. And for some companies, the change will take place over many years to more sustainable materials and processes. Now, there are some companies that unfortunately see this as a marketing problem and a PR problem rather than actually an operational problem. And they'll go a long way to convince you that they're maybe even leading the way in the sustainable efforts. But when you dig a bit deeper, you find that things aren't quite as they appear. There'll be some very convincing marketing material, perhaps interviews with industry experts and that kind of thing to create a picture. But when you dig down, you don't find many independent certificates and accreditations and that sort of thing. So don't be afraid to dig down a bit and see, if they really have got anything substantial to show you. And it's worth a word on a couple of things that is very commonly used by companies. Using recycled materials, which is generally a very good thing and a very sustainable practice. With plastics, for example, that you might get in some synthetic floors, there is a discussion that's asking, well, how many times can you recycle plastic? Metals and glass, you can recycle over and over, as far as we know. Plastics, you're good for recycling it once. It's not so clear whether you can recycle recycled plastic. So that may not be a long-term sustainable strategy. And the other thing that's used a lot is offsetting. And that's basically for companies that are producing a lot of carbon, and at the moment they have no option. The technology isn't there for them to change. And so what they choose to do instead is generate that carbon, but then do something else that offsets it, that collects it, basically. And tree planting is a very common offsetting strategy that some companies use. The idea is that you plant the right number of trees to collect that carbon that you're actually generating. And that's fine, but that's generally acknowledged as a short-term strategy only. And the RIBA, for example, they're telling their architect members that offsetting isn't really something you should rely heavily upon when you're choosing products to specify. Now, we're going to talk about other sustainable aspects of wood floors, including longevity, a little bit more about air quality and the effect they can have on the environment in the building. And then we'll talk about what options you've got at the end of the floor's life for recycling, reusing the materials, and we'll talk about heritage buildings as well, where wooden floors can play quite a useful part. So in terms of longevity, take, for example, a 22mm solid hardwood floor, and that's distinct from an engineered floor, which only has a thin layer of hardwood. If you've got a solid floor, you're looking at least a 60-year lifespan for that floor. So if you're designing a building for 60 years, in theory, you're fitting one floor for the life of the building, which is very good in terms of life cycle costs. You're not having to remanufacture new floors to replace them, and that's a big raw materials and energy saving. So if you combine the idea that you've got a low carbon product to start with, carbon neutral, and it's got a very long lifespan, that's a pretty powerful combination when you're choosing products for sustainable buildings. Now, as far as the indoor climate's concerned, I talked about the indoor climate label, which is really the key to this. But so first of all, you've got a low emissions floor, but you've also got a floor that doesn't really harbour dust and dirt. It's very easy to keep clean. It's very hygienic. It's a low static floor, which in certain types of building and certain countries is an important consideration. And it helps to maintain an even temperature in a room, which brings me on to the next slide. If you have a high traffic area, sometimes a light coloured floor, you'd need to be a bit careful about what you chose. But I'm going to suggest that if you go for a light coloured solid hardwood floor, it's suitable for high traffic areas. First of all, because it's got a very hard wearing lacquer, but also because you can refurbish it. That 60-year lifespan arises because you can sand and seal the floor between 8 and 10 times during its life. Now, a light coloured floor is a reflective floor, and it means you're slightly less reliant on artificial lighting than you would be if you had darker finishes in the room. Also, a lighter finish, when we're talking about keeping buildings cool in the hot summer months, a lighter colour floor, it won't be soaking up heat all day, and that makes it a lot easier to cool the building down overnight, so you're using passive cooling. A dark coloured floor will act as a heat store, and it will be releasing that heat overnight when you really want things to cool down. So wood floors give you a good option in that respect. Now, looking towards the end of the floor's life, or maybe one of its lives, if there's a building that's extended or refurbished, sometimes the floor may become redundant. And we, for example, have a buyback scheme, which is really just a link between clients with redundant floors and clients that want repurposed, recycled floors. And there's a good example here. This photo shows the National Theatre in Scotland, in Glasgow. It's in their office space, and there's no prizes for guessing that they've got an old sports floor there with all the remains of the line marking on it. Now, that's a beach floor that could have several decades of useful life left in it. Now, that's good in terms of reusing the material, but you also have to bear in mind this is very adaptable, this floor, in terms of colour changes and options that you've got for refurbishments. Because if they decide they don't like all those coloured lines, they can sand it off and they can have a natural beach floor, or they can stain it white, grey, or any one of a number of different wood colours. So even if they have a design change in that space and have a completely different colour scheme, there's every chance that they can adapt the wood floor to suit that. So you're really reducing the number of reasons for throwing that floor away. So its longevity is great, but so is its adaptability. It's a strength in terms of its sustainability. Taking that idea a stage further, designing for disassembly is I think, something that's increasingly being talked about. And to illustrate that, it's best to talk about this particular building, which is owned by a Danish whiskey distillery, and it's like their visitors centre. I guess you can roll up and sample their wares. It's got a 15-year lifespan, and they wanted to have a building that after 15 years, they weren't going to put it into landfill. And so they designed it so it could all be taken apart. So these individual building elements, they'll either be bolted or screwed or clipped together. So it's a reversible fixing method. So they haven't used bonding and welding and amalgamating materials. So in theory, in 15 years' time, they can take that building apart and they'll have a large quantity of reusable building materials. And I think this idea is gaining traction. In the London Plan 2021, they're actually asking people to think ahead and to look at the fate of the building materials when it's eventually demolished. So they're really getting people now to plan ahead in terms of what happens with the materials. And because this is exactly what the circular economy is designed to achieve. It's not going away. It's something that I think we're going to see more and more. And looking at heritage buildings, where often we kind of assume they'll be there forever. Nobody really talks about the demolition date of a heritage building. Now, solid wood floors play a great part in heritage building restoration. This particular one is a place called Crescent in Cornwall, which is a heritage centre. It used to be an old brewery, another connection with alcoholic drinks, strangely enough. And oak flooring was used as part of the restoration. And it's a good choice aesthetically. We've used timber floors in our heritage buildings for centuries. So in terms of it being in keeping with the building, it's often a good choice. But also you can fix it with a light touch, because there are ways of installing these floors where you don't need to damage or fix into the existing fabric. And there's levelling systems as well. So those really old subfloors that have been chopped around over the years, you can just level up the new floor and get a nice level floor to finish off. These are some examples of some of the heritage buildings that we've been involved in. Crescent is this one on the right-hand side. Right in the middle, you've got the Royal Opera House, where there's about 500 square metres of oak flooring on a levelling system. Bottom left is a black oak floor that's in the Hilda Bessie building in Oxford University. Top left is a herringbone oak floor that's in an art gallery in Ireland. And then next to that is the Spanish City building in Whitley Bay. So quite a diversity of buildings there that are using wood floors. Back to Crescent we had a chat with the architect, David Byrne at Purcell Architects. Asked him the reasons why he chose the solid oak floor, and sustainability was high on the list. Aesthetics, the fact that timber fits very well with other natural materials, the stone walls, the granite slabs in the floor. Aesthetically, it's a very good fit, very easy to look after, and illumination and natural lighting was mentioned as well. So it kind of ties in with what we said about the benefits the light colour floor can give you. So I think at that point, I'll hand back to the other Richard. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Richard. So you've obviously seen some nice case studies there. So I'm just going to sort of talk about the different types of hardwood and formats and so on. So we have single plank widths or wide board, whatever you want to call it. That will vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. And you know, for Junckers purposes, we'll do 140 mil wide, 185 mil wide in a single plank. And then you have the narrower strip floors. So again, for Junckers purposes, it would be a 2-strip. Other manufacturers may do a 3-strip, but 2-strip is unique to us. So essentially, that's 2 pieces of timber joined together to make a larger floorboard. And so what that essentially does is speed up the installation process and makes the machining and the quality of the board good quality and accurate. But so it's a little bit different from days gone by where there was the much smaller pieces of narrow strip floors, individual pieces laid, which is a bit more labour intensive. We then come on to things like pattern floors, so herringbone, twin herringbone, large format herringbone, basket weave patterns, and ladder patterns. So these are all, again, laid in a pattern format and would need to be glued down. I've mentioned the 22 mil board there, so 22 mil or 20.5 mil thick boards being structural boards for Junckers, but 18 mil is the minimum for a structural board. And what we mean by that is boards that can be nailed to battens or existing joists, because they're thick enough to take dynamic loads. So they have the structural strength. But then there are the thinner floors, which could be 14, 15 mil, in some cases thinner. So they're non-structural, and they're normally referred to as overlays. So they cannot be installed over battens. They need to be on a structural floor, such as a screed or a timber deck. And all the aforementioned boards, and again, it's going to differ from manufacturer to manufacturer, but there's different species: ash, oak, beech, maple that are on offer to create the required look for the project. So there are differences between solid and engineered boards, and we've kind of touched on them already, but these will have implications on sustainability of a building. So I mentioned before, we only manufacture solid boards. We just feel that's we always have done, and we'll always do that. We just feel there's too many constraints for some of the engineered boards out there. So what are the differences? So engineered boards are made from several layers of wood species or composite materials. There might not always be a natural wood, it may be a composite of wood glued together. The top layer is generally 3 to 4 mil. In some cases, it can be thinner than that. So that's the 3 to 4 mil of the real hardwood or the surface that you see. So basically, this requires more raw materials, often obtained from multiple sources of supply, and generally there's a use of substantial amounts of adhesives during the manufacturing process. But all of this will also have a significant impact upon the raw materials and energy and transport and waste. And obviously a solid board is the same material throughout the full thickness. So essentially it can be sanded and sealed 8 to 10 times, which means it has a longer lifespan, and it can be repurposed many times at the end of its life, but due to the longevity, and Richard touched on some of those case studies. One other thing to separate the difference between, and this is more sort of to do with installation guidelines, and we get asked quite a lot, is that there is a perception that the engineered boards are perceived to be more dimensionally stable than a solid, but manufacturers do not allow any more, engineered manufacturers do not allow any more flexibility on on-site moisture contents of screeds, subfloors, or room temperature or relative humidity within the site. And in some cases, they have a narrower band of relative humidity to deal with. But that's something you need to look at as a specifier when you're looking at the all the data sheets. So let's compare the impression of the different flooring types leave on the planet. So using publicly available data from EPDs, which we've already mentioned, it's possible to compare the global warming potential embodied carbon of a number of commonly specified flooring types. So this slide will compare products and reveals how some products can cause an increase in carbon in the atmosphere and others will actually reduce it. So a carpet releases CO2, typically made from synthetic fibres. A vinyl floor does the same, synthetic man-made floor covering, generally oil-based products. Epoxy terrazzo, a composite material bound together with cement and epoxy resin. But then you look at a solid hardwood floor, it absorbs the CO2 for all the reasons that we mentioned before. So as you can see from the 4 examples, only hardwood is carbon negative. So what sort of areas can we use the wood? So they can be used in commercial, residential, hospitality, sports, dance, public buildings. You've seen lots of case studies of that before. So residential, but also apartments where you might need Part E compliant for acoustic separation, and manufacturers such as us will supply the acoustic battens and underlay systems to go with that. As we do with sports floors, we supply the various batten systems that meet the BSCN 14904 sports requirements, which you need for an air elastic floor. So they're all available from us as well. And again, very few floors are guaranteed to be installed over underfloor heating. We do an awful lot of that in sports as well as residential and commercial. So you've always got to work with the manufacturer during that specification period to make sure it's designed correctly. So coming on to maintenance, there's a range of cleaning and maintenance products available, and they're all dedicated forward floors, particularly cleaning products as well, to make sure they don't damage the actual lacquer or oil on the floor. So what this, regular maintenance is only going to increase that lifespan of that already long lifespan of a solid floor. So cleaning procedures are very simple and straightforward, but they can be broken down into 3 stages. You have your daily cleaning, which would mean sweeping, getting rid of any dirt, grit, and so on, and then a damp clean only. So we're not talking about buckets of water overflowed, just a damp clean, well wrung out mop, flat-headed mop, or scrubber dry machine, depending on the environment, if it's commercial or domestic, and so on. Then we have medium-term maintenance. Again, that requires a thorough clean. Then it's followed by an abrasion of the existing floor finish, the lacquer, and then a new coat of seal. And this is not to be confused with a sand and seal. This is just a top-up of the existing lacquer, which will then therefore increase the intervals between when the floor may need to be sanded and sealed in its lifetime. And that brings us on to the third section, which is the longer-term maintenance, where eventually a floor is going to need to be sanded back to bare timber. So that will be done, and then it will be resealed with primers and a couple of coats of lacquer. And what that will do is remove any accumulated scratches, minor surface damage, and restores the floor looking like new. And going back to what Richard said earlier on, you might want to change the colour of the floor, so you can do that during that process as well. So essentially, the solid floor will require that sanding and sealing during its lifespan, but it will remain there for many years and achieve that 60-year lifespan, whereas certain other floor finishes may have been come and gone and laid several times. So I'll hand you back over to Richard. Great, thank you, Richard.
Well, I'd just like to show you 3 case studies where sustainability was very high on the designer's brief. Very different buildings. And the first of those is Bath Abbey, which many of you may know. And the project in hand here is the refurbishment of their music school. And they have a 60-strong choir, and this is their main work space, their main rehearsal space. And it was refurbished as part of a major refurbishment at the Abbey. They wanted something that was in keeping with the building fabric, so they're mixing with natural materials again, and they wanted something hard-wearing, sustainable, long-lasting, easy to look after, and an oak floor ticked all those boxes. The reasons they chose it were very similar to the Crescent-Kernow job that I mentioned earlier. We also talked with Hugh Williams, who's their director of musical director, and he again said what a benefit the wood floor was to the overall aesthetics in the room, and it also helped with acoustics. They really like this as a space to rehearse in, and the natural materials are very provide a very nice feel to the room. So that's the Bath Abbey Music School. The second case study is in Valencia in Spain, and it's an education building, a primary school, and their ethos is really to get close to nature, almost to bring nature indoors. It's in an area where there is quite a lot of green space, and they've focused very heavily on natural materials, solid wood floor, a beach floor in this case. They're using timber for a lot of the structural elements in the building, and they've got a terracotta ceiling soffit, fair-faced brickwork, the clay bricks, a huge emphasis on natural materials. And they got some awards for this building. It was a BREEAM Excellent rated project, and they got the Green Four Leaves award as well, which is a Spanish sustainability award, very, very high standard to achieve. I think it was the first building in Spain to get both of these awards. And the third one is a factory building, unusually in Norway. They're a street furniture manufacturer, but straight away you can see, comparing with the school we've just looked at, there's extensive use of timber for the building structure and for finishes. There's beach flooring on the stairs there. This is actually set in a massive area of green space. It's in about 300 acres of forest land. And it's a crucifix-shaped building. You can see there in one of the top photos. The roof is covered in photovoltaic cells, and they wanted to, connect closely with nature. And they got a BREEAM Outstanding Award for this building, which is the first in the Nordic region. And there's a couple of interesting statistics really that relate to this building. If you compare this factory with a traditionally built factory of the same size, the global warming impact of this project is only 50% of what it would have been if it was built in the traditional way. So it's a great, worthwhile reduction in global warming by building in this way and designing in this way. The other thing is that, and I think largely because of their PV cells on the roof, the energy consumption of this building is only 10% of what it would be, again, had it been traditionally built. So, a very sustainable project and rewarded with that BREEAM Outstanding Award. So, okay, I think back again to Richard. It's always back to Richard, isn't it?
Okay, so we're nearing the end. I'm just going to just wrap things up and just summarise a few things. So there's several ways that we can tackle the climate change through specifying sustainable products. So we can look at the whole life carbon. We can take a whole life carbon approach, and in particular to wood, it acts as a carbon store, and it's natural and it's renewable. Sustainable procurement, so sourcing wood responsibly through certification schemes that we discussed earlier, and social responsible supply chains, the chain of custody. Restoration, so timber floors are well used in retrofit projects, and that's due to the flexibility, and they're suitable for that type of application. But if you can't retrofit, using modern methods of construction to reduce waste, operational costs, and again, these sort of things generally take place off-site. Health and well-being is key. So it makes people feel as good indoors as it does outdoors. You just generally get a good feeling when you walk into a room that is well lit and has a wood floor and other wood finishes. And behaviour change, so we inspire through best practices and evidence. And wood is a cost-free solution to carbon capture. I mean, and it's ideal for sectors of economy that can become carbon neutral. So, so wood has an exceptional long lifespan, has zero wood waste, and all the byproduct from that is used in the production, and in particular Junckers situation, we power our own factory, and it has great green credentials. And again, we don't need to go through this, but there's all the EPDs, BRE Green Guide, A+ rating, which is what solid wood floor in particular gets, and so on. So just to finalise, and just a reminder that all our products are available on NBS Source and Chorus for you to download. And I think really that pretty much wraps up the presentation. So if you've got any questions, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you. That was excellent. It was really comprehensive, and that's been. Well, it's just great to see a company where Junckers are clearly in their DNA about being sustainable and green, way before it became fashionable. And so it's some interesting stuff that I've picked up. I can't see any questions that have come in, and you've actually answered a load of them as I'm going through. I've been jotting things down, and you've certainly answered them. It's from, certainly things around the offset. And I love the fact that coloured flooring, the old sports hall where it'd been reused, because that sends a really strong message. If you're showing your green credentials, anyone walks in is going to probably ask a question about that immediately, and that's
got a story, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, and it's reusing products, isn't it? It's that's great. And the life expectancy thing I thought was really interesting. The building 15 years, and that was known, and then they wanted to dismantle the building with minimal impact, and the fact that they've gone into it, because you can see there's a good argument. Someone saying we don't want 60-year life because we're only here for 15 years, which is the kind of thing you would normally hear, where in fact somebody's thought about it and thought no.
Yeah, you get that when you especially if it's like tenants moving in and out of buildings. We only want a product that's going to last 5 years and then picked up,
Well, if you look at that on a grander scale, places like the City of London and other major capitals around the world, in their business sectors, to rip down a building and rebuild it, if it's a wealthy client, they don't think twice about pulling down one tower block and building another one. And that's probably, days are numbered. They're going to have to start justifying what happens with those thousands of tons of material
I may have missed this, Richard, so I apologise. The installing side obviously is critical. Are installers kind of trained via Junckers, or do you install it yourself so you know that the quality is there?
It's all done by an approved flooring contractor scheme.
Right.
So we have several tiers. I mean, we can't stop anyone installing it because you've got people who just buy it for their own homes and so on. But when we're looking at projects like this, generally probably 90% of them are installed by approved flooring contractors. They have to do training and they have to meet all sorts of strict criteria to be on that list.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing which was interesting was the EPD, and you mentioned there because you was going through a whole raft of stuff, and as an ex sort of client for a local authority, it's always tricky knowing what to actually ask for because everyone's sustainable, everyone's green, everyone uses all the words. And then you mentioned the EPD, which kind of then gives you something which you can ask for, which is always really useful, so that you are guaranteeing you're getting what you want. I suppose the other question that I had was, is there a checklist out there that you guys produce so that if you're a client, or you may be a client that's non-technical, or it may be just sort of normal practice, architects specifying or surveyors, but do you have a checklist of things that people should, because you mentioned loads and there's quite a lot on there, and I just wondered if there was a checklist that Junckers produced so that it's got everything captured in a small space.
Yeah. In our case, we've got a sustainability section on our website, which you actually reach because it's becoming, such a big issue. It's there on the homepage. You can access it from the homepage, and it's got different information pages on basically what we've been talking about in this presentation.
Yes.
And then there's downloads, all those certificates, and there's probably a few more that we didn't mention this time around.
No.
So it's all there in the one place, and there's one for pre-analysis.
There's a carbon calculator as well.
Yes.
So that's
one of the slides towards the end you showed, Richard, that was an extract from our carbon calculator, where you can compare different types of floor finish and their impact on global warming, which is beautifully simple and very clear, for any designer. If they want a broad brush approach, should I specify terrazzo or carpet or hopefully hardwood, then they've got a very simple way of making a broad comparison with those before they dig into specific brands and manufacturers.
No, okay, that's brilliant. I am mindful. I know we started a little late, but we are kind of I think it's about looking here 2:05. So I will wrap up and say thanks ever so much. That really was a fascinating presentation on flooring, and it as an engineer as well, I was interested in the fact you mentioned the underfloor heating and the lighting and all that kind of stuff, because bringing all this together is so important. So thank you so much for your time. I'm hoping you guys will be able to support us at our study day next year. I think Mark from Kears has been talking to Sam. We're back at the University of Reading on the 11th of July for our study day, which is all about retrofit. We've already started to work on that. What can I say? Thank you for your time. Thank you
very much.
Such a comprehensive presentation. Some great photographs as well to support your. It's always great when you see nice photographs that kind of show a product at its best. Just for those people who are members, we will be getting the newsletter out in the next few weeks with more presentations. We've got Dr. Sam Mundy, who's going to be talking about energy saving from the University of Reading on the catering side. So that one's to be booked in. And we're going to be running a number of webinars next year around the theme of retrofit as we build up to the study day. If you're listening and you're not a member, then you work for a local authority. It's free membership. We are the only organisation that represents private and public sector who are trying to deliver and maintain better public sector buildings. Go onto our website and you can become a member for free. And if you're in the private sector, it's not very expensive either. So we'd love you to join us. And thank you for coming along today, everybody, and have a great day.
And thanks for all attending.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.